we do need to move beyond both the 1945 and the 1979 settlements. There was something inadequate about both of those settlements. And I think what unites Morris and I is not just coming from a religious faith, different common religious faith traditions, but I think a central belief that the thing that is missing, the thing that both of those 1945 and 1979 philosophies have in common, a materialist understanding of human nature, a politics that largely sees people on the left as taxpayers, welfare claimants, public sector employees, on the right sees people as taxpayers, capitalists, workers, shareholders. There's something missing in that philosophy. And that what we have in common, and what I think we want to bring to politics, is that there is no political party, no political philosophy that at the moment fundamentally sees people as parents, neighbours, members of civic society groups. And that relational dimension from politics is missing. And so though I will probably be biased more towards market solutions to some of the problems, and Morris will see a greater role in the state, the important thing we start with is that relationship emphasis. And I hope that that will come out in the discussion tonight. And I think, Jenny, we're tweeting, aren't we, for anyone who wants to tweet, under Synod Common Good. So if any of you are tweeters out here and want to tweet anything, hashtag Synod Common Good. Now, I should begin, first of all, by saying that I am not a spokesman for the Conservative Party tonight. Now, David Cameron was once asked if he would ever consider bombing a certain foreign country. And he said he would, on one condition, that one bomb was left in the payload, and on its way back, it took out Tim Montgomerie and Conservative Home. So you get an idea that I'm independent-minded, and I was recently singled out by Linton Crosby, the guy who ran the Tory campaign, as a mischief maker. So it's great to have my former chaplain from the time I was university, Richard Burridge, here. And Richard will remember we had some pretty lively discussions in the past. I think they got quite heated, but they were nearly always settled with a hug and a pint or three at the university bar. I don't know whether tonight will get as heated, but we do have the Church Estates Commissioner here to keep things quiet. And Caroline Spellman is someone I worked with incredibly closely when I used to run the Conservative Christian Fellowship. If people want someone to look at, if people who've lost faith in politics and think politicians are in it for themselves and are party-pree and not open to new thinking, more of them need to meet MPs like Caroline. I hope you'll get to know Caroline in the years ahead. You couldn't have a better person to fulfill this role, and I really hope you enjoy working with her in the years ahead. I certainly enjoyed working with Caroline a lot in the years in the past. So my favourite Bible story is the one I just want to start with, and it's a retelling of the story of the prodigal son. And how many of you have read Philip Yancey's What's So Amazing About Grace? Well, you may know this story, but I can't hear it enough, and so you're going to hear it again, those who've heard it before. I sometimes struggle to read it without a tear welling up, and I shall try and avoid doing that, but I want to tell the story anyway, because if you remember nothing else about what I want to share with you today, it introduces really what I do want to say. Yancey tells of a young girl who had become bored of suburban life in Michigan. After an argument with her dad, she heads for Detroit and excitement and falls in with a man who provides her with drugs that make her happier than she's ever felt before. He puts her up in a luxurious apartment, and in return, she performs sexual tricks for men. It goes wonderfully well for a while, until she falls ill. Suddenly she's friendless, on the streets, and living worse than her dog back home. She phones her parents for the first time in 2 years. She only gets the answer machine, but leaves a message, explaining that she's on a coach and what time she'll be arriving at the local bus station. She says she's sorry. I will understand if they never want to see her again. If they're not at the station, she'll stay on the bus and she'll travel on and find a new home. She imagines many scenarios on the journey home, but none prepares her for the scene that greets her. Rather than an angry, unforgiving father standing with an "I told you so" face, her whole extended family are there waiting. 40 aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, cousins, grandparents, all with balloons and welcome home signs. That, for me, is the most powerful of all the biblical stories, retold in that modern context. And I think it is what the church should be taking to politics more than anything else. There is no love greater than God's love for us. But pretty close behind that is a parent's love for their children. The Pope, on his visit to Latin America this week, said the family is the nearest hospital, the first school for the young, the best home for the elderly. And in a politics where the dominant thinking is materialistic, the dominant thinking is where I began with my description of why Morris and I have so much in common, where the thoughts are always seeing us as taxpayers, or as welfare claimants, or as shareholders, or as workers, or as capitalists, essentially engaging with us not in relational terms but materialist terms. That's where I think the church has something very special to offer. I read a lot of Marvin Olasky in the development of my political thinking. It was a good inoculation against Richard Burridge's teaching. And one of his great observations in the book, The Tragedy of American Compassion, is that we develop the welfare state in the image of the God we worship. And who is the God that we worship? And he drew a comparison in his book between seeing God as a Father Christmas type figure, and so I excuse perhaps this gender-specific language, or as a loving father. And he said, you can develop, if you see God as essentially a Father Christmas figure who isn't interested in our behaviour, who just comes down the chimney once a year to deliver presents, then you will build the kind of welfare state that we've had in Britain for much of the post-war period. Materialistic, providing goods to people, but outside of any real context of relationship, and no real improvement in the person who is receiving the welfare. If, however, you see God much more as a loving father, who eventually, in the hierarchy of charity, wants us to stand on our own 2 feet, to leave the home, to be able to help others, to be that person who all loving fathers want their children to be, then you'll have a very different kind of welfare state. And the church, I think, should be encouraging that sort of ambitious compassion. Marvin Olasky, again, he talks about a feed and forget compassion. And he says in the feed and forget compassion, and he gives illustrations, he says, like a parent who will give their children time rather than toys. An education system that will give children high grades whatever they've achieved. all must win prizes, I think was the expression. Or a welfare state that will give people material sustenance without giving them the self-respect and the independence and the skills to stand up on their own feet. We've had a lot of feed and forget compassion in Britain, and we need an awful lot more, I would say, loving father compassion. And my friends, austerity isn't a short-term phenomenon. The welfare cuts that this government is making, by necessity, not by choice, we're not about to enter a period in 3 or 4 years where we can go back to the old ways of thinking. It isn't just a temporary financial crisis we face. The aging of our population, the rising health demands mean that we're going to be budgets of all kinds other than pensions and health are going to be under incredible pressure for a very long time to come. And we can't tax our way out of this situation either. Global competition means that we're at more or less the ceiling of what we can tax. We could perhaps impose a few more taxes on property, but overall the limits on public expenditure are here to stay, and therefore we have to find a way of being more of a loving state, a loving father welfare state than any other alternative, because unless we create more independent, able-bodied citizens who can look after themselves, their families and their communities, we won't be able to fulfill the primary responsibilities, which to look after those people who really can't look after themselves. There is no alternative to coin an expression. There is no alternative to the kind of welfare cuts that are being made. They could be distributed more in different ways, which I'll come on to briefly in a moment, but some form of cuts are definitely necessary. So let me get specific, and I just want to issue a few challenges before I sit down and then take questions. I read the Bishop's letter twice, once when it came out and once with interest. Once, not well, that was once recently when I knew I had to be on top of it. Goodness gracious. And it did occasionally get specific, but not specific enough for me. We've got Morris between us, so I feel a little bit safe. 3 occasions I particularly remember when it got specific. One I completely disagreed with, one I half agreed with, and one I basically completely agreed with. The first one I completely disagreed with was on Trident. It was basically regarding nuclear weapons as something that had to be done away with. Don't want to get into the nuclear debate, happy to win questions. My own view is that nuclear weapons can't be disinvented. The thing I half agreed with was the praise for the 0.7% commitment to the aid budget, something that Caroline was instrumental in arguing for and achieving in the Conservative Party. But I was half unhappy with it because it was almost as if the aid budget was what was delivering progress in Africa and other and developing parts of the world. And actually it's capitalism. Free market capitalism is the large driver of progress. Not many positive mentions of capitalism in the Bishop's letter, largely critical. But capitalism, not the aid budget, which I support as a driver. And then the third specific was on the living wage, which I happen to agree with. We've made progress this week, I think. It's probably not quite the living wage some people would want, but it's definitely progress. So the church, if it wants to be, is capable of getting specific. So I'd like it to get a bit more specific. And that's what my challenge is to you. Here are a few specifics. Because I think there are some things wrong with our politics. There are some things that the materialistic left and materialistic right need to hear. And this is what I suggest they might hear from you. Why, when the government announces this week that it's going to liberalise Sunday trading, do we immediately know that from the Treasury that the cost of liberalisation, the benefits of liberalisation are £200 million in terms of increased retail proceeds. But we don't know what the cost is on family. Yep. Why don't we have measures of social well-being as important as economic well-being. Why don't we measure our relational health in this country? And why can't the church put that on the agenda? Why in the bishop's letter, and I hope my search hasn't let me down, but why in the bishop's letter are many things mentioned, I think social justice 4 or 5 times, but the M word, marriage, isn't mentioned once. For me, marriage, one of the reasons I supported gay marriage when it went through the Commons recently, was I want everyone to be part of that institution, which doesn't just bring 2 people together, but brings extended families together as well. Will this church stand up for the most important relational institution of all, marriage? The green belt. Will the church say it's time to build on it? House prices and the unaffordable nature of housing is one of the great challenges of our time. I think if you live in a crowded house, if you are mortgaged up to the eyeballs, if you have to live with your parents until you're 30, there's no chance or very little chance your family will survive under that pressure. We need to build an awful lot of houses, and we'll only start doing that when we start building on the green belt, which actually, my friends, isn't as green as it sounds. Intergenerational justice. A lot of people in this room may find the cuts made to working age families' tax credits very difficult to defend in the budget. I certainly find them very difficult to defend. I think there should be a reassessment of the pension level. Why, when inflation is 0.1%, is the pension going up by 2.5% at a time of austerity? Will the church challenge government on intergenerational justice and get specific and still be able to look at the pensioners in their face on Sunday mornings? Work participation rates. It is celebrated in this country that now over 70% of people are going out to work. Work is seen as undoubtedly a good thing all of the time. Is it? Is it good for every family to have everyone out to work, all hours, antisocial hours? I don't think so. I've got others, but I'll stop at that point because I'm conscious that the time is running out. But there is a lot of exciting things happening in politics at the moment. I personally, as a Conservative who's often been critical of David Cameron, feel actually there's something very interesting in the Conservative Party at the moment. I think actually we were talking to Morris about this earlier. I think the Conservative Party might be at something of a tipping point. The budget had mixed moral messages in it, but here you have a Conservative Chancellor saying, actually, business doesn't get it all right all the time, which is why we're going to impose a living wage on it. We're going to impose an apprenticeship levy on it because it doesn't train enough young people. We are going to start doing a whole range of measures, including helping them export to China, because British businesses don't export to China, but German businesses do. The free market rhetoric and fundamentalism of the Conservative Party is being re-examined by the Conservative Party. You have Boris Johnson today talking about the importance of mass transport as a great leveller to deliver equality. The Conservative Party realises something is wrong with the 1979 settlement. I'm not sure it entirely knows what's wrong with the 1979 settlement, and I think it's the lack of understanding of the importance of relationships on multiple levels. I can't think of a more important role for the church to help the government get it right. Thank you very much.